Ancient cities held blueprints for survival that modern planners have forgotten. Our own crowded, resource-strained metropolises now face the very crises these ancient hubs were designed to withstand. This journey uncovers the ingenious principles that allowed civilizations to flourish for centuries, from hidden water systems to self-sufficient food networks. By the end, you will possess a new lens for seeing urban design, one where the past offers powerful solutions for our future. How did planners in the desert create cool, comfortable cities without a single watt of electricity? What was the secret to a metropolis feeding its entire population from within its own walls? The answers lie in a forgotten architectural intelligence. What do you believe is the most important lesson we have lost from ancient city builders? The first stones of a city were never laid at random. Deep in the fertile crescents of Mesopotamia and along the life-giving banks of the Nile, humanity faced a monumental shift. As nomadic tribes settled into farming communities, they encountered a new set of problems. How do you distribute water fairly to hundreds of households? Where do you place homes to avoid flooding yet remain close to the fields? How do you organize a growing population so that everyone has access to communal spaces and protection? This was not a haphazard experiment. It was the dawn of a conscious, deliberate craft, urban planning. These early planners saw their settlements not as mere collections of buildings, but as living, breathing entities. They understood that for a city to survive and thrive, its parts had to work in harmony with the natural world and with each other. This holistic vision gave rise to the very first principles of zoning, separating residential areas from industrial ones for safety and sanity. It created the earliest networks of circulation, paths wide enough for carts and pedestrians that connected homes to temples and markets, and it carved out public spaces, the central plazas and courtyards that became the heart of civic life. Every decision was a response to a practical demand, a solution etched into the landscape that would set a precedent for thousands of years. The blueprint for urban survival was being drawn for the very first time, not on paper, but on the earth itself. The blueprint began with a profound respect for the land itself. Ancient planners did not see the natural world as an obstacle to be conquered, but as a partner in a delicate dance. Their cities were not imposed upon the landscape, they emerged from it, woven into the very fabric of the local ecology. This was not a romantic ideal, it was a practical necessity for survival. Visualize the meticulously planned streets of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the world's earliest major cities. Its main thoroughfares were not just laid out on a grid, they were intentionally aligned with the prevailing wind patterns. This created a natural ventilation system, channeling cool breezes through the city to provide relief from the relentless Indus Valley heat. The buildings themselves were constructed from standardized, locally baked bricks, making them not only durable but also a seamless extension of the earth they stood on. This principle of harmonizing with the environment went far beyond single cities. It was a universal approach that emphasized adapting to the specific topography, climate, and water systems of a region. The goal was to create a settlement that could withstand environmental stresses without depleting the very resources it depended on. In Mesopotamia, for example, planners did not simply fight the annual flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They learned to harness it. They built complex networks of canals and basins to divert the floodwaters, transforming a potential disaster into a reliable irrigation system that fed their vast agricultural fields. This symbiosis with the river's natural cycle meant the city could feed its population with minimal human effort and zero fossil fuels. Key aspects of this ancient wisdom are startlingly relevant. Planners oriented structures to capture the optimal angle of the sun for warmth in winter and shade in summer. They preserved green belts within and around their cities, which provided food, building materials, and helped purify the air. They integrated existing ponds, streams, and lakes into their urban design, using these water bodies to naturally cool the air and create more temperate microclimates. Look at the Inca citadel of Machu Picchu, perched high in the Andes. The architects did not flatten the mountain peak. Instead, they built a series of breathtaking terraces that followed the contours of the slopes. These terraces prevented catastrophic soil erosion and maximized every available inch of arable land, creating a self-sufficient agricultural base in a seemingly impossible location. So we are left to wonder, how can we reapply this deep reverence for natural systems in our own sprawling concrete jungles? The answer may flow from the most vital resource of all. Water was the lifeblood of any city, a resource so vital that its mastery defined the line between prosperity and collapse. Ancient engineers understood this duality perfectly, viewing water not just as a gift to be cherished, but as a formidable force that demanded respect and intelligent management. They devised systems of breathtaking ingenuity to harness its power while meticulously guarding against its threats. Think of the monumental aqueducts of Rome, snaking across the landscape for miles to deliver fresh mountain springs directly into the heart of the metropolis. These were not merely functional pipes, they were grand architectural statements that supplied public baths, fountains, and private homes, transforming urban life with unprecedented access to clean water. Or consider the breathtaking stepwells of India, magnificent inverted temples carved deep into the earth. These structures served a triple purpose. They were reliable water sources during dry seasons, beautifully cool retreats from the blistering heat, and vibrant social hubs where communities gathered. The underlying principle was a comprehensive water cycle approach. These civilizations became experts in capturing every drop of rainfall, channeling it into vast reservoirs and tanks, and then distributing it through intricate networks of canals and pipes. This distribution was often governed by strict codes that prioritized equity and public hygiene, ensuring that no single neighborhood was left without this essential resource. Perhaps the most elegant solution was the Qanat system of ancient Persia. These were gently sloping underground tunnels that tapped into mountain aquifers many miles away. By keeping the water flowing underground, Persian engineers prevented evaporation in the scorching desert heat, delivering a steady, reliable stream of water to the surface for irrigation and drinking. It was a masterpiece of sustainable innovation, a technology so effective it spread across continents. But managing water also meant controlling its fury. In the Harappan cities like Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists have uncovered sophisticated networks of covered drainage canals running alongside streets and into larger waterways. These systems were designed to swiftly channel monsoon rains away from the city, preventing the destructive waterlogging that could cripple urban infrastructure. Meanwhile, in the arid rock city of Petra, the Nabateans mastered the art of conservation. They carved countless cisterns directly into the solid rock cliffs, capturing and storing every precious drop of seasonal rainwater. This meticulous planning allowed their magnificent city to thrive in the heart of a desert. So what can these ancient hydraulics teach us about our own modern water crises, with their dwindling reservoirs and polluted rivers? The lesson is one of harmony and foresight, of working with the natural water cycle rather than fighting against it. Just as these civilizations secured their most vital liquid resource, they applied the same level of strategic foresight to another fundamental need, the food that sustained their massive urban populations. Securing a reliable water supply was only half the battle. The true test of a city's resilience was its ability to feed itself. Ancient metropolises were not passive consumers of resources shipped in from distant lands. They were active, integrated producers of their own food. Planners masterfully wove agriculture directly into the urban fabric, ensuring that sustenance and beauty grew side by side. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon stand as a powerful symbol of this philosophy, a stunning terraced complex where fruit, vegetables, and flowers thrived, demonstrating that utility and splendor could be one and the same. This was not a singular marvel but a widespread practice. Cities systematically allocated land for crops and orchards within their walls, and they developed brilliant systems for recycling organic waste to fertilize these urban plots, closing the nutrient loop. Markets were strategically placed to minimize the distance food had to travel, drastically reducing spoilage and ensuring that what was harvested in the morning could be sold by the afternoon. In the Americas, the city of Teotihuacan perfected an aquatic form of urban farming with its chinampas. These were not simple floating gardens, but carefully constructed raised beds built on the shallow lake beds around the city. Fed by nutrient-rich canal water, the chinampas produced multiple harvests each year, supporting a population density that would rival many modern cities. The strategies were as diverse as the cultures that employed them. Communal gardens were a common feature, providing households with fresh produce and fostering a shared sense of responsibility for the community's well-being. Rooftops and courtyards were utilized for smaller-scale farming, while vast peri-urban agricultural belts surrounding the city acted as both a continuous food source and a defensive buffer against sieges or regional famines. Perhaps one of the most ambitious examples was the Khmer capital of Angkor. Its engineers constructed an immense, sprawling network of reservoirs and canals that captured monsoon rains. This system did more than just prevent flooding. It transformed the seasonal deluge into a controlled irrigation network for vast rice paddies, turning a potential catastrophe into the engine of the empire's food supply. This deep integration of farming and city life created a buffer against uncertainty and forged a tangible connection between citizens and the land that sustained them. How might our own disconnected urban centers, with their reliance on global supply chains, rediscover this self-sufficient spirit? The answer requires looking not just at how these cities fed themselves, but also at how they defended everything they had built from external threats. A city that could feed and water itself was a prize worth defending. This reality forged the fourth principle of ancient urban survival, designing infrastructure that was as strategically defensive as it was socially vibrant. The legendary walls of Constantinople stand as the ultimate testament to this philosophy. They were not just a single line of stone, but a multi-layered masterpiece of military engineering, with deep moats, an outer wall, and a massive inner wall studded with nearly 100 towers. For over 1,000 years, this complex system repelled countless armies, but its true genius lay in its daily function. These formidable barriers enclosed entire neighborhoods, markets, and gardens, creating a secure world where civic and economic life could flourish uninterrupted by the constant threats outside. The gates were not mere openings, they were heavily fortified control points that could be sealed in an instant. Yet during peacetime they buzzed with the flow of merchants, pilgrims, and travelers, becoming hubs of commerce and cultural exchange. This dual-purpose design was a global standard. In medieval Europe, cities were encircled by water-filled moats that served as both a daunting obstacle for siege towers and a ready reservoir for firefighting. Chinese fortress cities employed colossal zigzag gates, forcing any attacker to navigate a deadly, exposed corridor under a hail of projectiles from the walls above. Even the very layout of a city's interior was a tool for security. Narrow, winding streets, which might seem charmingly chaotic today, were deliberate designs to create choke points, slowing down invading forces who breached the outer walls and turning every neighborhood into a potential death trap for unfamiliar enemies. Centralized armories ensured that weapons and supplies were stored in a secure, easily accessible location for the city's defenders. The citadel of Mycenae in ancient Greece took this concept to its logical extreme. Its famous cyclopean walls, built from enormous, unmortared stones, were perched atop a steep hill, using the natural terrain itself as its primary defense. The massive Lion Gate, the only entrance, was constructed to be both imposing and easily defensible, a clear message of power and permanence. So what is the modern equivalent of these ancient walls? Our vulnerabilities have simply shifted form, from invading armies to cyber attacks, supply chain disruptions, and systemic social fractures. The lesson is not about building higher physical barriers, but about designing redundancy, community cohesion, and resilient systems that can withstand unexpected shocks. Just as these formidable defenses protected the life within, a final, invisible network was required to animate it all, the intricate pathways of trade and communication that connected these urban hubs to the wider world. A city's walls may have defined its borders, but it was the paths within and beyond them that gave it life. Mobility was the circulatory system of the ancient metropolis, a network of roads, canals, and pathways that pulsed with the constant flow of goods, people, and ideas. Planners understood that for a city to thrive, it had to be connected, both internally for its citizens and externally to the wider world. The legendary straight roads of the Romans were far more than simple dirt tracks. They were engineering marvels, wide enough for two armies to pass and paved with stone to withstand the elements. These roads were the empire's nervous system, allowing legions to march swiftly to quell unrest and enabling grain, wine, and marble to travel hundreds of miles, binding distant provinces into a single, cohesive unit. Their genius lay in the details, a deep foundation of rubble, cambered surfaces for drainage, and mile markers that offered travelers both orientation and a sense of imperial reach. This network was punctuated by vital hubs, the bustling forums of Roman cities where all major roads converged, and the caravanserais of the Silk Road, which provided safe havens for weary merchants and their camels, fostering cross-continental exchange in the middle of barren deserts. This principle of efficient connectivity was universal, adapted to every conceivable terrain. In the rugged Andes, the Inca constructed a breathtaking road system spanning thousands of miles. They built suspension bridges from woven grass that swung over treacherous gorges and carved stairways directly into cliff faces. This was not a network for wheeled carts, which they did not use, but for runners and llama caravans, enabling rapid communication and administrative control across a vast mountainous empire. The key to these systems was a clear hierarchy and standardization. Cities were designed with grand arterial roads for major traffic, branching into secondary streets for neighborhood access, and finally narrowing into local alleys for residential life. This organization prevented congestion and ensured that every part of the city, from the Grand Temple to the most modest home, was integrated into the whole. Where geography allowed, ancient planners seamlessly integrated waterways into their transit networks. Canals became the superhighways for bulk goods that were too heavy or cumbersome for land transport. The Grand Canal of China remains the most staggering example, a monumental waterway that stretched over 1,000 miles. By linking the fertile rice-producing south to the political power base in the north, it did more than just move cargo. It unified the empire's economy, stabilized its food supply, and fostered a shared cultural identity across diverse regions. So how can our own gridlocked cities, choked by traffic and reliant on fragile supply chains, learn from these ancient efficiencies? The answer lies not in simply building more lanes, but in designing multimodal, resilient networks that prioritize the seamless movement of people and commerce. This very connectivity, the lifeblood of goods and information, was what ultimately fueled the city's beating heart, its economic vitality. A city's bustling thoroughfares and grand walls meant nothing without a beating economic heart. Ancient planners understood that prosperity was not a happy accident. It was a deliberate design, cultivated through carefully zoned districts dedicated to production, trade, and commerce. These were not chaotic free-for-alls, but intelligently organized ecosystems that optimized activity while minimizing conflict and congestion. The Agora of a classical Greek city serves as the perfect example. This was not merely a marketplace, it was the vibrant core of public life. Here, the clinking of coins from a spice merchant's stall mingled with the passionate debates of philosophers, while politicians canvassed for votes just steps away from artisans selling their pottery. This intentional mixing created a powerful synergy where economic exchange fueled intellectual and social dynamism. The placement of these economic zones was always strategic, situated near main gates or along major waterways for maximum accessibility to both local citizens and traveling merchants. This careful zoning extended to the very rules of the market. In the bustling bazaars of Mesopotamia, city authorities enforced the use of standardized stone weights. This simple regulation was a profound innovation, building a foundation of trust that allowed commerce to flourish by ensuring fair deals for everyone, from a local farmer selling grain to a distant trader offering exotic textiles. Specialization was another key to their success. Planners encouraged the clustering of specific crafts in designated districts. Think of the ancient Syrian city of Damascus, renowned for centuries for its master metalworkers. By concentrating these artisans in one area, the city created a powerhouse of innovation. Skills were shared and refined through daily collaboration. Apprentices learned from multiple masters, and the district itself became a magnet for buyers seeking the finest steel blades. This was an early industrial cluster, fueled not by machinery but by collective human ingenuity. The infrastructure supporting these zones was equally thoughtful. Planners integrated secure storage warehouses to protect goods, designated stalls for money changers to ease financial transactions, and allocated open spaces for seasonal fairs that could attract merchants from across the known world. One of the most brilliant adaptations was found in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. This island city turned its unique geography into an economic advantage with its vast floating markets. Canoes laden with fresh produce, ceramics, and textiles navigated a network of canals, bringing goods directly into the heart of residential neighborhoods. This system allowed for an incredibly efficient distribution of resources, minimizing travel time and ensuring the entire city was fed and supplied. So what can these ancient economies teach our own often sterile commercial hubs? The lesson is about designing for human interaction, fostering specialization, and building trust through fair and accessible systems. As this vibrant commerce generated wealth and connected diverse people, it created a powerful need for spaces that could nourish the human spirit in return. Beyond the daily grind of commerce and the security of towering walls, ancient cities nurtured a soul. The seventh principle of urban survival focused on creating powerful civic and religious centers, spaces designed not just for function, but for forging a shared identity. These were the heartbeats of the city, the places where governance, worship, and community life converged to create an unbreakable sense of belonging. Visualize the Acropolis in Athens, its magnificent temples and open-air theaters carved into the sacred rock. This was not merely a collection of beautiful buildings, it was the spiritual and political core of Athenian democracy. Citizens gathered here to participate in rituals, watch plays that explored the human condition, and engage in the messy, vital work of self-governance. Every visit reinforced their connection to each other and to the ideals that defined their civilization. The strategic placement of these centers was itself a message of power and permanence. They were often built on elevated ground, a symbolic gesture that lifted civic life above the ordinary while providing a practical advantage for defense and visibility. Their design was always grand, scaled to accommodate massive crowds during festivals, public announcements, or legal assemblies, making every citizen feel part of something larger than themselves. Archaeologists point to the Forum Romanum as the ultimate example of a multifunctional civic heart. This sprawling plaza was the stage upon which the drama of Roman life unfolded. In one corner, senators debated laws in the Curia, while just steps away, merchants haggled in the market stalls. Nearby, citizens gathered in the basilica for court proceedings, and priests conducted sacred rituals at the Temple of Vesta. This intentional integration meant that daily life was constantly interwoven with a sense of civic duty and divine favor. The elements of these centers were carefully chosen to serve both practical and profound human needs. Grand amphitheaters provided entertainment and a collective emotional release, from the comedies of Greece to the gladiatorial games of Rome. Basilicas, with their vast columned halls, housed the complex machinery of administration and justice. And sacred groves or tranquil temple gardens offered spaces for quiet reflection, a necessary counterbalance to the city's noise. Even the most ancient structures served multiple purposes. The massive ziggurats of Mesopotamia were not just temples, they were towering stairways to the gods, functioning as both spiritual centers and advanced astronomical observatories. By aligning their construction with the movements of the stars, the planners linked the earthly order of the city directly to the cosmic order, reinforcing the ruler's divine authority and the city's place in the universe. So how do these ancient hubs, designed for collective experience, inform our often fragmented modern public spaces? The lesson is that a city's resilience depends as much on social cohesion as it does on physical infrastructure. This vital sense of community was deliberately engineered from the ground up, starting with the most fundamental unit of urban life, the home. The grandest civic spaces were built upon a foundation of stable, inclusive homes. Ancient planners understood that a city's true strength came not just from its temples and markets, but from the quality of life within its residential quarters. They deliberately engineered housing to foster social stability, mixing different classes and family structures to prevent the divisions that can fracture a society. In the heart of Rome, the insulae, or apartment blocks, rose several stories high, their facades a testament to urban density. Here, a wealthy merchant's family might occupy the more spacious lower floors, while laborers and artisans lived in smaller units above, all sharing access to central courtyards that became hubs for daily interaction and mutual support. This was not an accidental arrangement, it was a conscious strategy to weave a diverse social fabric. The use of locally sourced, affordable materials like baked brick or timber kept construction costs manageable, allowing a broader segment of the population to live with dignity. And within these homes, planners prioritized fundamental elements of well-being, ensuring adequate ventilation to circulate fresh air and designing window placements to maximize natural light, long before we understood their critical role in physical and mental health. The Harappan cities of the Indus Valley offer a remarkable example of this egalitarian vision. excavations reveal neighborhoods of standardized brick-built homes, each equipped with its own private well and connected to a city-wide covered drainage system. This was not a luxury reserved for the elite. It was a baseline standard that provided a remarkable level of sanitation and comfort for a significant portion of the urban population. This principle of community-focused design took many forms across the ancient world. In some cultures, homes were clustered around shared facilities, like a communal bathhouse or a central kitchen, reducing the resource burden on individual families and strengthening social bonds through daily, necessary interaction. Houses were also often designed with flexibility in mind, with interior spaces that could be easily reconfigured as a family grew or its needs changed. Consider the breathtaking cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, built into the sheltered alcoves of canyon walls. These were not isolated units, but a complex of interconnected structures, linked by ladders and pathways. This design provided unparalleled security from the elements and potential threats, but its deeper genius was in how it forced a constant, close-knit community life, where cooperation was essential for survival. So what do these historical models reveal about our own modern housing crises, defined by affordability and isolation? They demonstrate that housing is more than shelter. It is the primary building block of social resilience. And just as these thoughtfully designed homes provided a foundation for daily life, the cities that contained them needed sophisticated systems to protect the collective health of all who lived within them. A city's vitality depended as much on its unseen cleanliness as its visible splendor. For ancient planners, sanitation was not an afterthought. It was a primary pillar of urban survival, a deliberate defense against the invisible threats of disease and decay. They engineered complex systems to manage waste and promote hygiene, recognizing that a healthy population was the foundation of a resilient city. The Indus Valley civilization offers a stunningly advanced example. In Mohenjo-Daro, almost every single house was connected to a city-wide network of covered drains. These brick-lined channels ran beneath the streets, efficiently carrying wastewater away from residential areas to designated dumping grounds outside the city walls. This was not a sporadic effort. It was a standardized, meticulously maintained infrastructure that drastically reduced the spread of waterborne illnesses. This commitment to public health was woven into the daily fabric of urban life. Cities built communal bathhouses like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, which served both ritual purification and practical hygiene. Public latrines, sometimes with sophisticated overhead water tanks for flushing, were installed in busy areas to concentrate and manage human waste. Civic authorities even established some of the earliest known garbage collection protocols, enforcing norms that kept streets clear of refuse and prevented the buildup of filth that could attract pests and spark epidemics. The Greek and Roman worlds elevated this principle to an art form. Aqueducts did more than supply drinking water. They fed countless public fountains and lavish bath complexes, making regular bathing an accessible public good. In cities like Ephesus, the flow of clean water was a testament to the belief that personal hygiene was essential for civic well-being. The engineering was brilliantly pragmatic. Planners masterfully separated clean water conduits from the dirty flows of sewage, a fundamental concept we still rely on today. They turned waste into a resource, composting organic refuse to create rich fertilizer for the urban agricultural belts we discussed earlier, closing the nutrient loop perfectly. They even understood the psychological and physical benefits of a pleasant environment, planting fragrant herbs like lavender and rosemary in public spaces to naturally purify the air and lift spirits. The ultimate symbol of this sanitary prowess was Rome's Cloaca Maxima. Beginning as a simple drainage channel for the marshy forum, it was expanded over centuries into a monumental sewer, a vaulted underground marvel large enough for a boat to traverse. This system did not just manage waste, it literally laid the groundwork for Rome's expansion, allowing the city to build on previously uninhabitable land and supporting a population density that would not be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. So how can these ancient, holistic approaches to cleanliness inspire our own modern public health initiatives, which often struggle with pollution and sanitation access? The lesson is that true urban health requires integrating hygiene into the very design of a city, not just treating its symptoms. And just as these systems protected the physical body of the city, another principle was needed to nourish its spirit and morale through beauty and meaning. A city's resilience was measured not only in grain stores and sewer lines, but in the beauty that lifted its citizens' gaze. Ancient planners wielded art and aesthetics as tools of survival, embedding color, symmetry, and ornamentation into the very bones of their cities to nourish morale, convey order, and bind the community to a shared identity. A fresco in a Minoan palace was more than decoration. It was a deliberate infusion of life and vibrancy into a royal corridor, transforming a simple walk into an encounter with dolphins and saffron gatherers. The towering, intricately carved pillars of an Egyptian temple did more than hold up a roof. They told stories of gods and pharaohs, making divine power visible and tangible to every worshipper. This was beauty with a purpose, woven into the daily routes of ordinary people. Sculptures greeted them at crossroads, murals unfolded on public walls, and landscaped gardens offered pockets of tranquility amid the urban bustle. Art was not locked away in private collections, it was a public utility for the human spirit. Art historians point to the profound intentionality behind this integration. The strict axial symmetry of a traditional Chinese city, with its gates and palaces aligned along a central north-south axis, was not merely an architectural preference. It was a physical manifestation of a cosmic belief in harmony and balance, a visual promise that order prevailed in the universe and, by extension, within the city walls. Similarly, the grand plazas of Mayan cities were studded with carved stone stelae. These were not arbitrary monuments, they were history books in stone, recording the lineages of rulers and the myths of creation, ensuring that a collective memory was etched into the very ground where people gathered. The elements of this aesthetic layer were both grand and granular. Ornate gateways marked transitions from the profane to the sacred. Patterned pavements underfoot turned a simple street into a textured tapestry, and the gentle sound of water in public fountains provided a constant, calming soundtrack to urban life. In Byzantine Constantinople, the glittering mosaics that covered the interior of churches like Hagia Sophia served a profound dual purpose. They dazzled the eye with their golden brilliance, but for a populace that largely could not read, these images were a visual Bible, broadcasting complex religious narratives and solidifying a common faith through the power of breathtaking imagery. So how can this ancient understanding that beauty is functional reshape our own often sterile urban environments? It suggests that resilience is not just about withstanding disaster, but about creating a world people feel deeply connected to and inspired to maintain. This profound integration of art and order, however, required a powerful, centralized vision to become reality. The most resilient city walls and the most ingenious aqueducts were ultimately governed by human hands. A city's physical design could only carry it so far. Its long-term survival demanded a living, breathing system of administration capable of adapting to crisis, allocating scarce resources, and listening to its own people. This was the 11th principle, the creation of adaptive governance models that balanced authority with accountability. In the council halls of ancient Greek city-states, citizens gathered not as passive subjects but as active participants. They engaged in fierce, open debates over everything from tax rates to declarations of war, their votes directly shaping policies that sought to balance individual freedoms with the collective needs of the polis. This was not pure democracy as we might imagine it today, but a fascinating and often pragmatic blend of governing styles. A city might retain a council of elders, an oligarchic element for experienced guidance, while also incorporating democratic assemblies and even a single general or monarch for decisive leadership during emergencies. The key was flexibility, the capacity to shift and respond without collapsing. For these systems to function across generations, they relied on meticulous record-keeping. Scribes and surveyors meticulously documented laws, land surveys, and urban plans. This created a vital layer of institutional memory and consistency, preventing each new leader from starting from scratch and ensuring that the city's foundational blueprints were not lost to time. Political scientists point to the Mauryan Empire in India as a masterclass in bureaucratic organization. Its administration featured a complex hierarchy of officials, each with clear responsibilities for city maintenance. One department oversaw the vital repair of roads and irrigation canals, while another managed the meticulous collection of taxes that funded these public works. This specialization created a system of accountability where failures in infrastructure or service could be traced back to a specific office. To prevent corruption and consolidate power, these ancient governments developed surprisingly modern strategies. Some implemented term limits for key officials, ensuring a regular influx of new ideas and preventing the entrenchment of a single faction. Others conducted public audits of major construction projects, inviting citizens to witness how their taxes were being spent. Many established formal forums for grievance redressal, where a merchant who felt cheated or a farmer whose land was flooded could seek justice directly from the authorities. This collaborative spirit was perhaps most vividly embodied in the Viking Thing assemblies. These were not held in stuffy chambers, but in open, designated spaces, often a field surrounded by a circle of stones. Here, free men would gather to resolve disputes, negotiate trade agreements, and collectively plan community defenses. It was a raw, direct form of participatory governance that reinforced the idea that the community itself was the ultimate source of law and order. So what governance lessons can these ancient models offer our own, often rigid municipal structures? The answer lies in their inherent flexibility, their commitment to documentation, and their mechanisms for direct citizen engagement. This very capacity for adaptation was the final, critical tool in a city's arsenal, the ability to not just withstand a disaster, but to learn from it and rebuild. True resilience was engineered through deliberate duplication. Ancient planners were masters of redundancy, building cities with layers of backup systems to survive the unpredictable blows of fate, from invading armies to devastating droughts. They understood that a single point of failure could unravel an entire civilization, so they designed not for optimal efficiency but for robust survival. Consider the dual harbors of Carthage, a brilliant maritime feat. The city's famous circular military port was protected inside a larger commercial harbor. If an enemy fleet managed to breach the outer defenses, the inner core of the navy remained secure and ready to launch a counterattack. This ensured that trade and military power could never be severed by a single, successful raid. Similarly, the grain silos of ancient Egypt were not merely storage pits. They were the kingdom's life insurance policy. During the Nile's plentiful years, overseers filled these vast, strategically located granaries to capacity. When the annual flood was weak and famine threatened, the state could release this surplus, feeding the population and maintaining social order through a crisis that would have toppled a less prepared society. This principle of redundancy manifested in countless ways. Cities did not rely on a single well or aqueduct. They developed multiple water sources, including public cisterns, neighborhood wells, and rainwater collection systems. If one source was poisoned in a siege or collapsed in an earthquake, others could sustain the populace. They cultivated diverse trade routes over land and sea, so that if conflict closed one path, commerce could be rerouted along another. They even established duplicate production centers for vital goods like pottery, textiles, and weapons, so that the destruction of one workshop district would not cripple the city's economy. Risk management experts point to cities like Pompeii, which had learned to build with flexible, earthquake-resistant timber frames within their stone walls, a testament to adapting to the known seismic threats of the region. Their ultimate fate was a catastrophe of a different scale, but their construction methods reveal a deep understanding of local risks. The tactics were both strategic and granular. Civic authorities maintained stockpiles of essential goods beyond just grain, including oil, salted meat, and timber for repairs. They trained citizen militias so that the city's defense did not rest solely on a professional and potentially defeatable army. And they chose building materials with care, using flexible wood and rubble infill that could sway and absorb the impact of tremors, rather than rigid, brittle stone that would shatter. Perhaps the most breathtaking example of built-in refuge is the underground cities of Cappadocia. These were not simple caves, but vast, multi-level subterranean metropolises carved deep into the soft volcanic rock. They featured hidden entrances, massive rolling stone doors, ventilation shafts, wells, kitchens, and wineries. During times of invasion, entire regional populations could disappear below ground for months, living in a self-contained ecosystem completely isolated from the threats above. So how can this ancient principle of redundancy make our own hyper-efficient, just-in-time cities more robust against unforeseen crises? It teaches us that true security lies not in a single, optimized system, but in having a Plan B and a Plan C ready to activate. These practical measures of survival, from dual harbors to hidden cities, were all guided by a deeper, more profound intellectual framework. A city's alignment with the cosmos was a matter of both spiritual faith and practical necessity. Ancient planners looked to the heavens not for abstract wonder, but for a concrete blueprint, charting the movements of the sun, moon, and stars to anchor their urban designs in a predictable celestial order. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as a monumental testament to this precision, its sides aligned almost perfectly with the four cardinal directions, an orientation that required breathtakingly accurate astronomical observation. This was not an isolated feat. In the high desert of Peru, the vast Nazca lines etched into the earth likely functioned as a massive celestial calendar. Certain lines point directly to the sun's position on the solstices, providing a reliable, year-long clock that told farmers precisely when to plant and when to harvest, directly linking the cosmos to the survival of the community. This deep integration of astronomy and geomancy, the art of reading the Earth's own energies, was a global phenomenon. It guided planners to auspicious locations for the most important structures, positioning temples, city gates, and royal tombs in harmony with both the landscape and the stars above. The Chinese practice of Feng Shui is perhaps the most comprehensive system born from this worldview. It was not mere superstition, but a sophisticated methodology for assessing the flow of wind and water through a site. Planners used this knowledge to position cities against protective mountains, orient main streets to capture beneficial breezes, and ensure water sources remained pure and accessible, all with the explicit goal of promoting the health, prosperity, and security of the inhabitants. The elements of this cosmic design were both grand and intimately woven into daily life. Streets were deliberately aligned with the solar path, ensuring that homes received optimal warmth in the winter and cooling shade in the summer. Prominent landmarks, whether natural rock formations or constructed towers, were often used to mark the rising sun on the equinoxes, turning the entire city into a living observatory that celebrated the turning of the seasons. Even the Great Stone Circle of Stonehenge, while not an urban center, embodies the same principle, a stark reminder of how deeply our ancestors embedded celestial knowledge into the very skin of the landscape. So what profound insights can these esoteric practices offer our own sustainable urbanism? They remind us that a city is part of a much larger, interconnected system, and that aligning with natural cycles is the ultimate form of efficient design. This cosmic awareness, in turn, supported the intellectual frameworks that allowed such knowledge to be preserved, refined, and taught, fueling a culture of continuous education and innovation. Knowledge was the ultimate strategic reserve, a resource more durable than stone and more vital than any stockpile of grain. Ancient planners deliberately engineered their cities to become hives of learning and innovation, understanding that intellectual capital was the engine of long-term survival and dominance. They built monumental libraries, schools, and workshops not as luxuries, but as critical infrastructure for advancing science, technology, and the very culture that bound the city together. The legendary Library of Alexandria stands as the ultimate symbol of this principle, a repository designed to gather all the world's known wisdom under one roof. It was far more than a storage place for scrolls. It was a vibrant research institution that attracted the finest minds across the Mediterranean. These scholars, supported by the state, debated, experimented, and made staggering discoveries that shaped the future, from Euclid's geometry to Archimedes' engineering principles. The very location of these centers was a strategic choice, often situated near temples or royal palaces. This physical proximity underscored a profound cultural belief that human ingenuity was a form of divine inspiration, and that the pursuit of knowledge was a sacred civic duty. In Baghdad, centuries later, the House of Wisdom took this concept even further. It was a bustling international academy where teams of scholars, translators, and scribes worked in concert. They did not merely preserve the ancient texts of Greece and India, they actively critiqued, expanded, and synthesized them, leading to foundational breakthroughs in algebra, astronomy, and optics that would later ignite the European Renaissance. The urban design supporting these hubs was meticulously planned to foster deep thought and collaboration. Quiet, colonnaded courtyards provided space for reflection and debate, while dedicated scriptoria, or writing rooms, hummed with the activity of copying manuscripts, ensuring that knowledge was not just created but widely disseminated. Public lectures and open forums brought new ideas directly to the citizenry, creating a culture that valued intellectual progress. On the other side of the world, the University of Nalanda in India perfected the model of residential learning. This was not a handful of buildings, but a vast campus with lecture halls, meditation chambers, and dormitories for thousands of students from across Asia. Its curriculum seamlessly blended spiritual philosophy with secular subjects like medicine, logic, and architecture, producing graduates who were not only enlightened but also immensely practical contributors to society. So how do we cultivate such powerful ecosystems of continuous innovation in our own modern cities, where learning is often siloed and specialized? The lesson is that knowledge thrives in open, supported, and interdisciplinary environments. And as this shared learning spread through the streets, it naturally began to codify the very rules that held the urban fabric together. reinforcing the social norms and laws that guided daily life for everyone. The blueprint for urban survival extended beyond bricks and mortar into the very structure of society itself. Ancient planners wielded the city's layout as a powerful tool to encode social order, using deliberate design to assign roles, reinforce hierarchies, and minimize the friction of urban life. This was not about oppression for its own sake, but about creating a predictable, stable environment where everyone knew their place and purpose. The ultimate expression of this principle was the Forbidden City in Beijing, a masterpiece of concentric walls and sequenced courtyards. Each gate and barrier physically separated the emperor, the son of heaven, from his officials, his servants, and finally the common populace. This design was a physical manifestation of a cosmic and social hierarchy, making the emperor's supreme status an undeniable, daily reality for every citizen. The arrangement was equally pragmatic. Across medieval European towns, planners consistently situated foul-smelling tanneries and other polluting workshops downstream and downwind from the residential quarters of the elite. This was a clear, unspoken statement of priority, protecting the health and sensibilities of the powerful while functionally assigning the burdens of industry to the lower classes. Sociologists point to the vast ceremonial avenues of ancient Persian capitals like Persepolis. These wide, straight boulevards were not designed for daily traffic, but for grand processions where the king and his army could display their majesty and might before the assembled populace. These events were choreographed spectacles of power, using the city itself as a stage to affirm authority and foster a shared sense of imperial unity. The techniques for embedding this social code were both monumental and subtle. Towering obelisks and colossal statues of rulers were placed at central crossroads, constantly reminding citizens of the source of law and order. Entire neighborhoods were often organized around kinship lines or specific craft guilds, clustering blacksmiths or potters together. This strengthened communal bonds and internal regulation, creating a city of distinct, manageable villages within the larger whole. Yet this stratification was sometimes balanced with a powerful sense of civic equality. The Romans, when establishing new colonial towns, frequently imposed a strict, uniform grid plan. Within this grid, they allocated standard, equal-sized plots of land to veteran soldiers and settlers. This equitable division of the most valuable asset, land, was a brilliant political tool. It promoted a sense of fairness and shared investment in the city's success, ensuring loyalty and order from the very start. So what does this ancient use of design as a social tool mean for our own cities today, where the lines of division are often economic rather than royal? The implications are profound, forcing us to ask who our modern urban layouts are truly designed to serve. This carefully managed internal order was entirely dependent on a stable, productive relationship with the world beyond the city walls. A city's walls marked a boundary, not a barrier. For all their grand temples and bustling markets, ancient urban centers understood that their survival was inextricably linked to the health of the lands beyond their gates. They cultivated a delicate, reciprocal relationship with the countryside, a symbiotic bond where the city and its rural surroundings supported and sustained one another. This was not an extractive relationship, but a partnership for mutual longevity. Consider the sprawling villa economies of the Roman Empire. Wealthy urban elites did not simply consume goods from the countryside. They actively invested in it, developing vast rural estates that supplied the city with grain, olive oil, timber, and seasonal labor. This system created a continuous economic loop where urban capital improved agricultural output, which in turn fed and fueled the urban population. The symbiosis was actively managed. Planners enacted laws to protect precious farmland from being swallowed by urban sprawl. They maintained the vital road networks that connected farms to city markets, ensuring that food could travel quickly and efficiently. Knowledge flowed in both directions, with urban engineers sharing advanced irrigation techniques with rural communities, boosting yields for everyone. Environmental historians highlight the sophisticated planning of ancient Japanese castle towns. These urban centers were deliberately situated with specific zones of rice paddies, vegetable plots, and carefully managed forests encircling them. These green belts were not just scenic, they were functional, providing a steady stream of food, building materials and fuel, while also acting as defensive buffers and natural flood controls. The strategies to maintain this balance were both practical and ingenious. Many cultures implemented rotating market systems, where specific days were designated for farmers from different regions to bring their goods directly into the city. This connected rural producers directly to urban consumers, eliminated layers of middlemen, and ensured a fresh, diverse food supply. Legal frameworks were also crucial, with some societies establishing early conservation laws to prevent the overexploitation of forests or the degradation of soil from unsustainable farming, protecting the resource base for future generations. In the Maya lowlands, this symbiosis reached an art form. Rather than clearing forests for short-term gain, Maya city-states practiced sophisticated forest management. They cultivated useful trees like fruit-bearing and hardwood species within designated zones, creating a sustainable, productive landscape that could support urban populations for centuries without causing catastrophic deforestation. So how do our modern cities, which often treat the countryside as a distant resource colony, rebuild these vital partnerships? The answer lies in seeing the city not as an island, but as the heart of a living, breathing regional organism. This physical and economic interdependence was mirrored by a deeper spiritual connection to place, one forged through ritual and remembrance. Ritual was the city's heartbeat, a rhythm of remembrance that strengthened its spirit against the tides of time and turmoil. Across the ancient world, planners meticulously embedded ceremonies, festivals, and memorials into the very fabric of urban life. These were not mere celebrations, they were vital tools for forging a shared identity and ensuring cultural continuity, especially when crisis struck. Think of the Panhellenic Games at Olympia, where a sacred truce halted all wars between perpetually feuding Greek city-states. Athletes and citizens gathered in a designated valley to compete and worship their common gods, transforming a landscape of political fragmentation into a temporary, powerful unity. This ritual use of a specific, sacred space reinforced a collective Hellenic identity that transcended local rivalries, reminding everyone of the values they held in common. The principle was universal. Planners intentionally designed amphitheaters for communal drama, sacred pools for purification rites, and ancestral tombs that physically connected the living to their lineage. These were not random locations, they were anchors for memory, ensuring that key stories and values were performed and remembered generation after generation. Anthropologists point to the Egyptian practice of building colossal mortuary temples adjacent to royal tombs. These structures were not just for the dead, they were bustling economic and religious centers where priests performed daily rituals. This constant activity linked the mundane reality of daily life to the grandeur of eternity, fostering a profound sense of civic pride and cosmic order that stabilized society. The elements of this mnemonic layer were both grand and intimate. Annual processions followed fixed routes through the city, physically retracing the steps of gods or heroes and making myth a tangible part of the urban geography. Public storytelling sessions in plazas turned history into living narrative, while archives and libraries preserved the official records that gave a city its documented biography. In the powerful kingdom of Axum, rulers erected towering memorial stelae, great stone obelisks intricately carved to record royal deeds and conquests. These were not hidden away, they stood in the heart of the city, ensuring that the achievements of the past were permanently visible, demanding to be remembered and emulated by future generations. So how can the deliberate creation of such ritual spaces enhance a sense of belonging and cohesion in our own incredibly diverse modern cities? The answer may lie in recognizing that shared stories and shared spaces are the bedrock of a resilient community. This deep cultural foundation, this sense of who they were, gave ancient cities the moral and psychological strength to face their greatest practical challenge, the relentless force of a changing climate. The desert sun offered no quarter, but ancient cities did not wilt under its gaze. They learned its rhythms and designed defenses that required no electricity, only intelligence. From the scorching plateaus of Persia to the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, planners treated climate not as an enemy, but as a dynamic partner in their designs. They mastered passive climate control, engineering urban comfort through architecture itself. In the cities of ancient Persia, tall, chimney-like structures called wind catchers rose above the rooftops. These ingenious towers captured cooler, faster-moving breezes high above the ground and funneled them down into the heart of buildings, creating a natural and constant air conditioning system. At the same time, they drew warm, stale air up and out, ensuring a continuous flow that made life bearable in the searing heat. This was not a technology for the wealthy elite, it was a common feature of urban life. Similarly, in the American Southwest, the Pueblo people constructed their dwellings from thick adobe bricks. These massive earthen walls possessed a remarkable thermal mass, absorbing the intense heat of the day and slowly releasing its warmth during the cool desert nights. This simple, brilliant use of local material created a stable, comfortable indoor temperature with zero energy input, a stark contrast to our modern reliance on power-hungry systems. The entire layout of a city was a tool for climate moderation. In the ancient Yemeni city of Shibam, planners built towering mud brick skyscrapers incredibly close together. This was not a result of limited space, but a deliberate strategy. The narrow streets between these high rises functioned as deep, shaded canyons, protecting pedestrians and the lower levels of buildings from the direct blaze of the sun. This created a cooler microclimate at the street level, turning the city's own form into a shield. Every detail was considered. Courtyards were strategically placed to act as thermal lungs for a home, using principles of cross-ventilation to pull cool air through living spaces. Builders frequently used light-colored plasters and paints on exterior walls to reflect, rather than absorb, solar radiation. And in regions with sporadic but heavy rainfall, like parts of India, they perfected rainwater harvesting, channeling every precious drop from rooftops and streets into underground tanks for the dry season. Perhaps one of the most striking examples of foresight was found in the ice houses of ancient India. Long before mechanical refrigeration, engineers would collect ice and snow during the winter months and store it in deep, insulated, underground pits. These structures, known as yakchuls, preserved the ice throughout the year, providing a source of cooling and fresh treats during the hottest months. It was a stunning demonstration of planning for seasonal extremes. So what can these passive designs teach our glass and steel towers that guzzle electricity to maintain basic comfort? The answer is a return to architectural intelligence, to designing with, not against, the local environment. This deep reliance on the immediate landscape for comfort was matched by an equally sophisticated network that reached far beyond the horizon, a system that brought the wealth of distant lands directly to the city's gates. A city's true strength was measured by the reach of its relationships. While formidable walls and full granaries secured its immediate survival, long-term prosperity flowed through robust networks of trade and diplomacy that stretched to the horizon and beyond. Ancient planners understood that no city was an island, and they deliberately engineered connections that exchanged goods, ideas, and alliances, creating a buffer against local famines, conflicts, and economic collapse. The legendary Silk Road stands as the ultimate expression of this principle. This was not a single path, but a sprawling web of routes where camels carried silk, spices, and gems between the empires of Rome and China. Along these arduous journeys, planners established vital way stations known as caravanserais. These were fortified inns that offered merchants a safe place to rest, repair their goods, and most importantly, trade not just products but world-changing technologies like papermaking and gunpowder. The entire system relied on a foundation of mutual interest. Cities worked to keep land and sea routes safe from bandits and pirates, a form of ancient infrastructure security. They developed standardized weights and currencies to simplify transactions between strangers who did not share a language, and they sent skilled envoys to foreign courts, diplomats who negotiated treaties to protect their merchants and ensure the steady flow of commerce. Economic historians point to the Phoenician city of Tyre as a master of this strategy. It did not just send out trading ships, it planted colonies across the Mediterranean, from Carthage in North Africa to ports in Spain and Sicily. This created a web of mutual support, where each new settlement was both an independent city and a loyal node in a vast economic and cultural network, sharing resources and intelligence. The urban design supporting this global exchange was meticulously planned. Planners built ports with deep water harbors and secure warehouses to protect valuable cargo. They constructed diplomatic guest houses to host foreign emissaries in comfort and security, and they designed sprawling, multilingual market districts where a trader from Egypt could haggle with a merchant from India, using a shared vocabulary of gestures and numbers. On the coast of ancient East Africa, cities like Rapta perfected a trade system driven by nature's clock. They leveraged the predictable monsoon winds, which blew ships from Arabia and India to their shores for half the year and then carried them back. This seasonal rhythm linked inland African kingdoms to the vast markets of the Indian Ocean, bringing porcelain, glassware, and new ideas in exchange for ivory, gold, and exotic woods, fostering incredible wealth and cultural innovation. So how can our own deeply interconnected, yet often fragile, global supply chains learn from these ancient models? The lesson is that true resilience lies not in isolation, but in building diverse, reliable, and mutually beneficial partnerships. This intricate web of external engagement, however, could only function if it was supported by a clear and consistent set of rules back home, a legal framework that governed daily life within the city walls. Law was the ultimate blueprint for urban peace. A city could have all the water and food it needed, but without clear rules governing who owned what and how conflicts were resolved, it would descend into internal chaos. Ancient planners addressed this by instituting fair legal and property systems, creating a framework of stability that encouraged citizens to invest in their homes and neighborhoods, knowing their rights were protected. This was not about complex litigation, but about establishing a baseline of trust that allowed daily life to function smoothly. Envision the stark, public presence of the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most complete legal compilations. This towering stone stele was not hidden in a palace, but erected in a central square for all to see. Its carved cuneiform text laid out specific laws for everything from the structural safety of a builder's work to the terms of a commercial loan, making responsibilities and consequences clear to every member of society, from the elite to the common laborer. These early systems were often a pragmatic blend of long-standing customary norms and new, written statutes administered by respected judges or community elders in accessible venues like city gates or open-air courts. This accessibility was key to fostering a culture of accountability. Legal scholars point to ancient Athens, where popular courts empowered ordinary male citizens to argue their own cases before large juries of their peers. This direct participation in justice, while imperfect, reinforced the idea that the law belonged to the people and was a tool for resolving disputes, not just a weapon for the powerful. The elements supporting this legal clarity were both practical and profound. Meticulous land surveying using ropes and rods carefully demarcated property lines to prevent boundary disputes. Official registries tracked ownership and inheritance, creating a permanent record that survived generations. Penalties for violations, from fines to restitution, were designed not just to punish but to deter misconduct and restore balance to the community. In some Germanic tribes, a system known as allodial land tenure gave families perpetual and absolute rights to their urban plots. This was a powerful incentive for long-term stewardship, encouraging homeowners to plant orchards, improve their buildings, and care for the land, knowing it would remain with their lineage for generations to come. So, what aspects of this ancient legal clarity can help streamline our own often Byzantine and inaccessible modern urban governance? The lesson is that simplicity, transparency, and public accessibility in law are as vital as any physical infrastructure. With this framework of fair rules providing social stability, the city could then focus on its most valuable resource, the potential of its own people. A city's most vital infrastructure was not made of stone, but of flesh and intellect. Urban survival depended entirely on the skills, health, and ingenuity of its people, leading planners to treat human capital as their most precious resource. They invested deliberately in education, apprenticeships, and public health, understanding that a productive citizenry was the ultimate engine of innovation and resilience. In the bustling medieval guild halls of Europe, this philosophy was put into daily practice. Master craftsmen in trades from weaving to masonry took on young apprentices, providing them with food, shelter, and a comprehensive education in their craft. This was not a casual arrangement, but a formalized system that ensured quality standards were met and complex technical knowledge was passed, intact, from one generation to the next. The entire community benefited from this investment, as the guilds regulated prices, resolved disputes, and maintained a steady supply of expertly made goods, from sturdy shoes to durable roofing tiles. This commitment to cultivating talent took many forms across the ancient world. Civic authorities allocated public funds to establish schools and libraries that were accessible to citizens, not just a privileged elite. They organized public health campaigns to combat disease and built bath complexes that promoted hygiene as a social good. Competitions for poets, athletes, and artisans were regularly hosted to showcase local talent and inspire others to hone their skills. One of the most striking examples was the ancient Indian city of Taxila, which functioned as a renowned center of higher learning. It was not a single university, but a collection of specialized institutions where masters taught advanced subjects like medicine, military strategy, and philosophy to students who traveled from across Asia to study. This created a powerful intellectual hub that attracted the best minds and disseminated knowledge far and wide. Even the Romans, renowned for their engineering, applied this logic to healthcare. They established valetudinaria, military hospitals that provided surprisingly advanced medical care for soldiers and even slaves. This was not born of mere altruism, but but a starkly practical recognition that a healthy individual was a productive asset to the state, and that the community's strength depended on the well-being of all its members. So how can our own modern cities, with their vast resources, better cultivate the innate talents of every resident? The answer may lie in seeing education and health not as expenses, but as the most critical investments we can make. This forward-looking focus on nurturing human potential was perfectly balanced by a deep, abiding reverence for what had come before. A city's identity was etched not just in stone, but in memory. The 22nd principle of ancient urban survival was the deliberate preservation of legacy, a conscious effort to weave the past into the fabric of the present so that every new generation could draw strength and wisdom from those who came before. This was not mere nostalgia, it was a practical strategy for resilience, ensuring that hard-won lessons from triumphs and failures were never forgotten, but instead guided future planning. Visualize the walls of an Egyptian temple covered from floor to ceiling with intricate hieroglyphs. These were not only religious scenes, they were detailed records of a pharaoh's deeds, accounts of great construction projects, military campaigns, and responses to famine. By inscribing these stories in stone, they created a permanent archive, ensuring that the strategic choices of one ruler could inform the decisions of another centuries later. This principle of historical continuity took many active forms. Planners protected sacred sites even as cities expanded around them, honoring the spiritual geography that gave a place its meaning. They committed resources to restoring aging infrastructure, seeing the maintenance of an old aqueduct or city wall as a duty to their ancestors and a gift to their descendants. Annual rites and public festivals celebrated the city's founders, turning historical figures into living symbols that reinforced a shared identity during times of crisis. Archaeologists point to the layered cities of Troy as a perfect example of this palimpsest of urban evolution. Over millennia, each successive settlement was not built on a blank slate, but directly atop the ruins of its predecessor, often deliberately incorporating surviving walls or sacred landmarks into the new city plan. This created a physical continuity, a tangible reminder that the city was an enduring entity far greater than any single generation. The techniques for embedding this legacy were both monumental and meticulous. Builders used the most durable materials like granite or marble for key civic structures, designing them to stand for ages. They buried foundation deposits, boxes filled with artifacts and inscriptions beneath cornerstones, intending them as messages for future builders who might one day uncover them. And they trained scribes in a continuous, unbroken lineage to maintain detailed chronicles of the city's history, its laws, and its architectural innovations. Beyond the written word, the oral histories of indigenous American cities performed a similar vital function. Complex survival knowledge about local plants, water sources, and seasonal weather patterns was encoded not in ledgers but in stories, songs, and ceremonies. This turned everyday information into sacred lore, ensuring it was passed down accurately through generations, keeping the community adapted to its environment. So how can this ancient, intentional preservation of legacy reshape the often rootless identity of our modern cities? It suggests that knowing who you are is just as important as knowing what you need to build. This profound connection to history and place inevitably raises a deeper question, one that guided the hands of the earliest planners. What was the ultimate purpose of the city beyond mere survival? A city's skyline was once a map of the soul. The 23rd principle reveals how ancient planners integrated spiritual and moral frameworks directly into their blueprints, aligning physical spaces with divine order to foster a profound sense of harmony and purpose. This was not an abstract exercise, it was a practical method for guiding daily behavior, and reinforcing the ethical codes that held the community together. Envision the mandala-shaped layouts of Hindu and Buddhist cities like Angkor Wat, where the entire urban plan was a vast, intricate representation of the universe. For a resident, simply walking from their home to the market meant navigating a sacred diagram, a constant, subtle reminder that their individual life was part of a grand cosmic pattern. This integration was meticulously detailed, placing temples at the cardinal points to anchor the city in spiritual geography, and using sacred geometry in every measurement, from the width of a street to the proportions of a gate. Planners reserved specific areas for meditation gardens and spaces for charitable giving, weaving acts of virtue into the very geography of urban life. Theologians point to the classic Islamic city as a masterclass in this alignment. The central mosque was not just a place of worship, it was the true heart of the community, with its towering minaret providing a visual anchor for miles. The famously narrow, winding streets that surrounded it were not a planning error. They were a deliberate design to create pockets of cool shade and ensure personal privacy, reflecting deep-seated cultural and ethical values. The elements of this spiritual layer were both grand and intimate. Pilgrimage routes were established within the city walls, allowing for devotional journeys without leaving the urban sphere. Public squares were designed as spaces for almsgiving, while specific architectural features like low doorways were intended to symbolize virtues such as humility, forcing even a king to bow upon entry. In ancient Thebes, the processional ways were not simple roads, they were powerful ceremonial arteries connecting massive temples. Walking this path during a festival was to participate in a divine drama, a physical reinforcement of the pharaoh's sacred role as the sole intermediary between the people and the gods. So how can these spiritual considerations, which seem so distant from modern concrete and steel, contribute to a more holistic sense of urban well-being today? The answer may lie in recognizing that a city is more than a machine for living. It is an ecosystem for the human spirit. This deeply ingrained moral foundation, in turn, provided the social stability needed to navigate the most unpredictable force of all, the constant ebb and flow of its own population. A city's population was never a static number, but a living, breathing entity that swelled and shifted with the seasons of history. Managing this constant flow of new residents, whether through migration or natural growth, became a critical test of urban foresight. Planners had to anticipate the strain on resources and the delicate fabric of social cohesion, designing cities that could absorb diversity without fracturing. Ancient Rome stands as a colossal example of this principle in action. At its peak, its population swelled to over 1 million inhabitants, a density unmatched in Europe for nearly 2 millennia. The city did not crumble under this weight because its planners and administrators built for scale. Their infrastructure was designed to expand, with aqueducts that could be extended and new apartment blocks or insulae rising to meet housing demand. Crucially, Rome extended its citizenship laws, gradually granting rights to people from across Italy and beyond. This was a brilliant political maneuver, transforming potential outsiders into invested stakeholders who contributed to the city's military and economic strength. This demographic management required careful forecasting. Planners reserved undeveloped land within and just beyond the city walls for future neighborhoods and public works. They understood that a city that could not grow was a city destined to choke on its own success. Integration was actively engineered through shared facilities. Everyone, regardless of origin, used the same public baths, gathered water from the same fountains, and celebrated the same grand festivals, fostering a common Roman identity. Demographers point to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan as another masterstroke of urban integration. the city was organized into districts or calpuli, which were often based on ethnicity or professional lineage. This allowed migrant groups like the skilled potters from Collula or the feather workers from the tropics to maintain their unique cultural practices and community structures. Yet, these distinct districts were all woven into the larger civic whole, paying taxes to the central authority and contributing specialized goods to the city's immense market. The city's very layout supported this model of unity within diversity. The strategies employed by ancient planners were both practical and profound. They built on extensible grid systems that could be expanded block by block as the population grew. They created multi-ethnic markets that served as melting pots, where different groups not only traded goods but also exchanged ideas and intermarried. Perhaps most importantly, they provided core public services, like grain distributions or access to justice, that reduced the stark disparities between established residents and newcomers, preventing the kind of resentment that can tear a city apart. The Hellenistic city of Alexandria perfected the art of turning diversity into its greatest asset. It actively welcomed scholars, philosophers, and scientists from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and Judea, creating an environment where cross-cultural dialogue was the engine of innovation. The legendary Library of Alexandria was the ultimate symbol of this, a hub that drew on the collective knowledge of the known world. The city's prosperity was built not on homogeneity, but on its ability to harness the intellectual power of its varied population. So what can these ancient demographic strategies teach us about managing the explosive growth and incredible diversity of our own modern megacities? The lesson is that planning for people means planning for change, for creating flexible, inclusive systems that see newcomers not as a burden, but as a source of renewal and strength. As these dynamic populations created new pressures and possibilities, they naturally sparked a cascade of technological answers. The true strength of a city was measured by its capacity for invention. Ancient urban centers were not just consumers of technology, they were dynamic hubs of research and development, actively harnessing innovations that enhanced durability, efficiency, and the daily quality of life for every citizen. This was a deliberate, state-sponsored effort to solve practical problems on a grand scale. Consider the Roman mastery of concrete. They did not simply use the materials they found, they engineered a superior one by mixing lime with a volcanic ash called pozzolana. This chemical reaction created a paste that could cure underwater and grow stronger over centuries, resisting the salt spray of the sea and the tremors of the earth. It is why the immense, unsupported dome of the Pantheon still stands today, a testament to a material science breakthrough that we are only now beginning to fully understand. This process of harnessing technology involved a powerful ecosystem. Rulers and city governments directly funded workshops and experiments, creating spaces where artisans and engineers could collaborate. Knowledge was not hoarded, it traveled along trade routes, with innovations in metallurgy from one region inspiring breakthroughs in irrigation thousands of miles away. Historians of technology point to the profound impact of Chinese urban innovations like paper currency and block printing. These were not just commercial tools, they revolutionized city administration by making record-keeping efficient and democratized education by making books more accessible, fueling a more literate and informed citizenry. The innovations themselves spanned every facet of urban life. Mechanical devices like the water wheels of the Roman world harnessed river currents to grind grain on an industrial scale, freeing human labor for other tasks. Architectural advances such as the Roman arch and vault allowed for the creation of vast, open interior spaces like basilicas and bathhouses, defining the feel of public life. Metallurgical techniques produced not only sharper weapons for defense but also more durable tools for farmers and builders, increasing overall productivity. Even renewable energy was a cornerstone of ancient urban tech. The windmills of ancient Persia, with their cleverly crafted sails, captured the desert winds to pump water for irrigation and power mills for grinding flour, creating a sustainable power source that required no fuel beyond the air itself. So how can our own smart cities, obsessed with digital networks and complex electronics, learn from these elegantly simple ancient solutions? The answer lies in looking backward for low-tech answers to our high-tech sustainability crises, in valuing durability and harmony with nature over mere novelty. All these individual principles, from water management to technological innovation, were ultimately guided by a single, unifying vision that gave the ancient city its soul and its purpose. The true measure of a city was always its endurance across centuries. Ancient planners operated with a mindset almost alien to our short-term cycles, designing urban spaces not for immediate political gain, but as a permanent gift to future generations. They saw themselves as temporary stewards in a grand, unbroken lineage, building foundations meant to last 1,000 years. Visualize the silent, granite ruins of Great Zimbabwe, where master architects laid out vast, dry stone enclosures without mortar. Each perfectly fitted stone was a statement of power, certainly, but also a profound promise of continuity, a declaration that the community's identity and governance would persist long after its current leaders were dust. This long-term vision was woven into the most practical of actions. Planners planted sacred groves of trees whose canopies would not provide shade for half a century, knowing they would never sit under them. They laid foundations wider and deeper than the initial structure required, anticipating that someday a taller, grander building would rise upon their work. They inscribed their core ideals on stone stelae and in foundational deposits, speaking directly to the citizens of a future they would never see. Futurists point to the intricate Maya calendar system as the ultimate expression of this temporal thinking. It was not merely a way to track days, but a complex framework that mapped out urban development, agricultural cycles, and ceremonial life across vast spans of centuries. This cosmic clock embedded a long-term perspective into the very rhythm of daily existence, reminding every citizen that their actions were part of a story much larger than their own lifetime. The elements of this intergenerational responsibility were both structural and deeply cultural. Planners created adaptable urban frameworks, like flexible grid systems that could absorb future growth without losing their core logic. They established sacred traditions of maintenance and renewal, where repairing an old aqueduct or city wall was considered a civic and religious duty. And they meticulously mentored young successors, passing down the planning ethos through apprenticeships and oral histories, ensuring that the wisdom of the city's design would not die with its original creators. The philosophical schools of ancient India codified this duty, teaching that a well-planned city was an active servant to Dharma, the cosmic order that sustains the universe. A city built with integrity and foresight was not just a collection of buildings, it was a physical anchor for righteousness itself, meant to serve that cosmic purpose across countless ages. So how do we, in our era of quarterly reports and 5-year plans, rekindle this profound sense of intergenerational responsibility? How do we build our concrete and glass landscapes not just for ourselves, but for the great-great-grandchildren we will never meet? The answer demands that we see our cities not as disposable products, but as living legacies. From the covered drains of Mohenjo-Daro to the indestructible roads of Rome, these ancient planners perfected a delicate art, balancing radical innovation with deep respect for tradition. Their work leaves us a treasure trove of strategies, a forgotten toolkit for urban survival. We have walked through their cities and seen how their principles intertwined, where brilliant water management supported self-sufficient food networks, and where formidable defensive walls protected socially inclusive neighborhoods and spiritually uplifting spaces. These were not random successes, they were the result of a holistic vision that understood a city as a single, living organism. These historical lessons deliver a powerful message that sustainable urbanism is not a modern invention, but a timeless human pursuit. The real challenge for us today is to blend this recovered ancient wisdom with our own contemporary technology, to create hybrid solutions that are both smart and deeply humane. As you reflect on these ideas, consider your own community. Could its streets be redesigned to capture rainwater and create cooling green corridors? Could its neighborhoods foster the kind of social bonds that make a community resilient in a crisis? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of our shared past. Let us commit to building cities today that future generations will look back on with the same gratitude and awe we hold for the ancient.